streaming. Let's see if this is working. So if I go on another tab, I go on YouTube. Let me check it. If it's working, I'll start sharing the link. It's incredibly slow. Yes. Okay. 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 Yes, it's working. Okay. 2, so Discord, what's happened to you? It's just all black. Let's run this code again. So in Discord invite. Okay, so let's start actually doing this. So what I'm streaming is my editing of the notes for this talk, which I will give tomorrow, which is Surviving Applied Games. Okay, which also has actually it's called Surviving Applied Games Secrets. That's of course a rhetorical tool to create I don't know what. Anyway, so well, the title already has some ambiguity, which we'll put to service, which because surviving applied games can mean surviving the process of creating applied games as a victim of the process, as in my case the game designer and game developer who has to be the victim of all the changes of requirements and all the things that may go wrong during the process. And also it can mean surviving by earning your living with applied games, which I think, well, as we know, some indie developers like myself do. So actually, what I will say will touch both of these topics, and so I will try to share some experience, so that in the first interpretation will be maybe your experience may be less painful, and the second one maybe you may be more successful. And okay, so just one thing. Of course, I'm biased, but I want to tell you how. In the sense, I'll be stating I may state some strong opinions here, so you may be useful to put them in context. So, for example, as a game designer, I have this very romantic view of the process and narrative view of the process, as opposed to partially, say, people who believe that game design is more or less following the rules of a still partially undiscovered game grammar. And in the following, I mostly be taking as reference and talking about games which have a narrative component. And so by video game, it almost means for me a narrative game, or a game that has a narrative component in the following. Okay. So I've been working in game design for about 9-10 years, and I realized, projects that I have managed to somehow create about 15 projects, all digital, well, not all, almost all digital video games. And seen from my current point of view, these are almost all prototypes of games, not complete games, because I've come to realize that the process of completing an applied game, if ever that comes to completion, is way more long and complex than I thought when I started. So, what do you mean by applied games? Actually, I think that's the best way to understand that is to see examples of applied games, because the usual definitions like games with a purpose or games used not for pure entertainment, actually commercial games, not just indie games, but all kinds of commercial games are not just for pure entertainment, and they serve purposes which may be very deep, and this of course as any media that is matures, so like in novels, in movies, and in games. So it's very hard to define what applied games are. Let's say one approximation could be, this one came to me like yesterday, it's like version number 10. So games built on a complex theme that has nothing to do with play entertainment. So, and but this idea that it's built on a complex theme, not touching, not related to, is something that may be useful, and we should consider in the following, and that links all the projects that I've done. So let's see. whether I am actually streaming what I'm telling you. It seems to. And okay. Now, yeah, and of course, in the case of applied games, accessibility considerations, of course, in all games somehow, but in applied games, this aspect is often considered because of the kinds of customers and projects that fund the applied games creation process, and so this is also very nice. Now, of course, when you talk, so applied games, you're mostly working with people expert in some field that are not expert in games, whether they know it or not, which is usually a problem, but we'll talk about that later. Anyway, so one thing that may be useful is when you're talking with them is to clarify that there's a difference. I mean, not anything that you play with that is digital is a video game, at least in some sense. So if like you take, there are many playful applications that are like toys. So they have an open recombination universe. They have no plot, no rules, no story. That's not a video game, at least in this sense. And there are competitions done through digital means, then that they're called games, but they're not video games in the sense that we're talking about here. And in video games, you usually have a decision component, though not always. And of course, customers that want applications to ease the approach to complex themes, they may be happy to create stuff, and you may be happy to design stuff that is not strictly a video game. So like coaching applications, interactive tutorials, and persuasive applications. That is a very important field. In fact, is a field of research by itself. And but still, these are not video games, though they may be very important. This fact is a field where I have been and actually am working at the moment. Anyway, so given all these distinctions, there are applied games which are games, proper games. Okay. Now, one thing I know that among game designers, applied games are not always considered the top kind of work that you can do, and of course the edu games is a tainted expression somehow that comes from somehow badly made, boring games, and in fact working on applied games is, as we will see, is quite challenging. Because of the complexity of the task, but still I think, and I try to also show you, that there are some very, very cool aspects of applied games. So in general, the fact that using this media in probably a very original way to teach something that is believed to be very boring, but often actually is quite interesting, that can be a nice, cool job. Now, when we talk, there are several approaches to applied games, and when we talk about applied games, I'm already taking a longer path, which, for example, would not be called gamification, because I told you that in applied games we build the application on top of the complexity of the theme that we're dealing with, which is exactly what people that want to gamify applications don't want to do. So I'm already bringing you on this dangerous path. And this is also connected of the idea, there's a lot of work linking games and cultural heritage, and also there's an Italian initiative on this, and I think there's something that's not clearly understood here, that let's say, what's the role and the interaction between art and games, and not without entering the minefield of our games are art, but no, here we're talking about an educational aspect. But one thing that I want to be clear is that if you're doing games on art themes, one thing is to use art just as background of your games, which are the usual games, and they have nothing original, and the art game is used like a decoration. I would call this a right-wing interpretation of art as decoration, and art as decoration of your games. And then there's a different kind of work where actually the art piece and the intention of the artist is put in context and reworked, and we're trying to consider the art form as something that is trying to evoke an experience, a transformational experience, and so bringing art pieces in games in this sense, so not directly, but trying to understand the spirit of the artist, what she or he tried to, mostly he in the past, I'm sorry for what we actually have, what has remained, and how we can transform it and use it. And so this is something nice about applied games, that the theme, if you put the theme at the center of your work, the theme can give you depth, which is one of the big problems in making games, the lack of depth. And it can be lack of depth in narrative, in plot, in characters, in design, in style, and an applied theme, something that is complex, but of course not necessarily linked to art, like to say safety on offshore platforms, something like that, okay, or prevention of neglect and abuse in families. So these themes, they have so much research and so much problems inside and things you have to deal with, that they somehow can, if put at the center of your design, they can give depth to your game, and players will feel it. Players, people, human beings have this very refined perception dimension, which nobody has understood or defined, which is the perception of depth in games. And even they can't explain it in words, they feel it when a game does or does not have depth. Another little thing I want to talk about is that applied games are not, I mean, I'm talking mostly from my experience of digital applied games, and I thought, and I was wrong, that most of what I learned, what I knew, what I could do, what I had experience on, it was very specific to the topic, to the media, to the media of digital game. And instead, by working on my first board game, I mean as a professional work, I understood that lots and lots of what you learn in game design can be used also in art and media. And so I encourage you to experiment with that, but of course aware that there are always differences. So, and then of course another dimension that will, by working applied games, you may become more sensitive to is inclusiveness, because often, like games used in health, you have to make it possible for your games to be played by people with different kinds of capabilities. So this can really be a great lesson. You can learn a lot, of course, also for designing games which are for restricted audiences. In any way, you will learn a lot about game feel and controls and how to deal with a user interface. So that's another cool aspect of working with applied games. Okay, I'll take a little break here, then we go on with the methodology.